talk about the next one.
Okay, the next book will not take long. And this got rushed up the queue because it was small. And I had like 2 days before I went to Mexico. And I was like, right, what can I read that's very quick? So it's Jerome, Jerome, Three Men in a Boat.
Incredibly famous story. A lot of people have heard of it. I think there's songs about it, and
It's like 185 pages. It's very short. I think we picked this up in the Magic Bookshop when we were with Carla, potentially.
Carla specifically recommended this one.
So, I'm gonna say that I liked it, but didn't love it. Just about gets a yeah. Don't know that much about the author, but this is his most famous book. I think there is also a sequel.
Oh, 4 Men in a Boat.
It
2
looks
Men in a
like
Boat.
I can't remember.
Someone
It's Three
died.
Men and something else, I think. He mostly read...
3 Men in an Automobile.
Planes, trains, and automobiles. Can someone get those goddamn snakes off of this boat? No, so it looks like he mostly read like some short stories and bits and pieces. I don't want to say I forgot the title, but I got confused. I thought there were 4 men. It took me a long time, longer than it should have, to realize that Montmorency was a dog.
Oh!
So they do have a dog with them, and it took me a long time to realize that. And I was like, this guy is very strange in his behaviors. He's always like eating up all the food and running around mischievously, and I'm like, Montmorency's a wild character. And then at one point they just mentioned like he's on his hind legs or something. I'm like, hold on a second. Hold on. There are 3 men. There's also a dog.
I love that.
So that was embarrassing. Okay, so the book, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like a P.G. Wodehouse in the sense that it's these... There's a certain style of books that always come in around about 180 pages. Agatha Christie's, P.G. Wodehouse's, they're short books. Agatha Christie's different because they've always got that murder in them. P.G. Wodehouse books don't really go anywhere. And they try to add humour, and then it's kind of like, I just read 180 pages of bad jokes. It's not really a story. This was somewhere in between. Like, there is a bit of a story. There is still a little bit of humor. Like, it was fine. I liked it enough, but it doesn't make me want to read any more of him. And I don't think that the plot was engaging. I mean, the plot is very simple. 3 men go off on a boat, right?
Yeah.
They're just like, hey, let's do a fun activity. Let's go on a boat. There's some anecdotes and some stories and some things that happen. They also find a dead woman in the river.
Oh.
And then they tell us her story, and it's just like, yeah, she like had a child and her family abandoned her and let her die, basically. The usual Victorian type.
Okay, so this is basically a short story, it feels like. It's just like, alright, we're going to tell almost anthology, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, there's even a bit where they talk about some kids from school. I'll get to it in a minute because I want to quote some of it. A lot of this, like for a 180-page book, a lot of it is like flashbacks and other stories. So there's not that much happening in the story. There is a fun bit where they get like some little bath in the boat, and then there's like a long sequence about how they're going to trip up over the bath, and one guy wakes up and trips over it, and it's kind of like, who put that there, and this kind of stuff. There's a scene of potatoes. They have like 1 potato each, and they just talk a lot about how they're going to divide the potatoes up between
Is this
them.
Irish?
And I guess the ending is that they also talk about like how we're going to wash our clothes. I guess we'll bring some soap and wash them in the water on the Thames. So they're not out at sea, they're on the River Thames in London. They are very much like as close to being inland as they can be whilst on their boat. And in the end, they don't really enjoy it as much as they're meant to, right? That's the farce. And they're all pretending like we've committed to like whatever it is, like 3 months, and whatever they've committed to. And within a few days, someone invites them to like, hey, do you want to just get out of your boat and like come to the pub? And they're all like, no, we can't do that. We're doing this boat trip. And then they kind of look at each other like, okay, let's all abandon the boat trip. This was terrible. It was a terrible idea. Let's go like back onto land.
It's called 3 Men on the Bummel, is the
Ah.
next one. I do not know what a bummel is.
I do not know what a bummel is.
Right, anyway.
So like it was kind of amusing. And I mean, Carla basically said the same thing as PJ said about Tom Sawyer. It's a short book, it'll be kind of relaxing and something a bit different. And it was. It was nice without being special.
Fair enough.
If
It's
that
like,
makes
well,
sense.
I've gone through the ride, and it's fine. But it's not like you're gonna write home about it.
Yeah, exactly. There's some comedy. One bit, the guy basically, like, they ask him, like, what's wrong with you? And he says, well, I've not got the housemaid's knee, but I've got every other ailment. And he's kind of a hypochondriac. That's why they tell him to go on the boat to relax for a bit of change of air, you know? And he asks his friend, the doctor who's his friend, like, you're going to have to prescribe me something. And he writes down a prescription and folds it up. And when he gets home and looks at it, it just says, like, have some fresh air and some, like, beef and gravy. Basically, just, like, eat and sleep because there's nothing wrong with you. So, I mean, it's kind of funny, I guess. I would just struggle to say that it was, like, really that good. I'm going to read a bit about the school friends. This is just a long anecdote. They basically said there's a chap at their school that they used to call Sandford and Merton. Now, I don't know what kind of nicknames you give to people in school. I did not call anyone Sandford and Merton. That is the name of a paper merchant or something. And they talk about how he really loved his Greek and Latin and, like, was so very sickly all the time. He would be off for 6 weeks with rheumatism, and then when he would come back, he would go off with a November fog and the sunstroke and all these different things. And they were all like, we would love to be off school. We don't want to learn our Latin grammar. But this one poor boy was so sad that he kept missing his Latin classes. And
This happened in translations. The Brian Friel play.
I don't know why they call him Sandford and Merton. His real name was Stivings, which is the most English name I've ever heard. Stivings. But then again, that's irrelevant. It's like, here's a story about a kid from school for 3 pages. And then it's like, cool, back to the boat. Like, alright, I guess. And the same thing happens when they see the dead lady in the water. And they're just like, we found out later, and then here's her backstory. And it's like, alright, cool. And it doesn't even give us a plot point, because they're like, we saw a dead woman in the water, and we worried that we would have to do something, but then the Coast Guard arrived and did it. And it's like, oh, cool. So it doesn't even serve the plot. Like, you just went on then. It wasn't your responsibility. You know, that could have been a plot point. That could have been like, oh no, what do we do? Like, no. It just goes nowhere. It was just an excuse to talk about all of their backstory. The one other thing that happens is they eventually, like, stop in at, like, a riverbank, and someone comes along and says, like, you're on my master's land, have a shilling. He asks for a shilling, like a bribe, basically. So, but what happens is, he's like, you're on my master's land, and they're like, oh, cool. And they just continue. And he's like, well, it's been my duty to tell you that you need to leave. And they're like, cool, well, we really appreciate that you've done your duty. Thank you. And then they just continue, like, hanging around.
That sounds like you in a way, except... Except you would be the one, right, I've done my duty, and now it doesn't matter if they leave.
Well, I guess. That's what they were saying. They're like, oh, we really appreciate that you've done your duty. You're a good lad. Thanks for that. And we're going to stay. And then he takes a bribe. But then it turns out this is like an ongoing thing. Like, people go around riverbanks pretending you're on their master's land, and you bribe them a shilling to go away. And it's just a random guy stealing a shilling from you, basically. So it turns out they kind of are aware that this is like an ongoing thing. One of the chaps, Harris, sings a comical song. I don't know why, like 2 pages are devoted to it, but they basically just, he asks to sing a song and then they tell him not to because, like, he's a really bad singer. And at one point he talks about, like, dancing on ruins and singing comic songs, and they tell him, like, oh, you should be a little bit more Christian. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, nothing really goes anywhere. You know, it's like, here's some stuff. Okay. There's one funny line, though.
Just one.
We played Morceau from the old German masters. We discussed philosophy and ethics. We flirted with graceful dignity. We were even humorous in a high-class way. And I kind of like that. Like, we were even humorous, but in a classy way.
Of course.
I think at one point they tell Harris that he's stinky or something. I can't remember. I'm struggling to find more to say about this book. It is just there. It is relaxing. It is nice. It just has very few plot points. Most of it's told in like flashback type sequences. I suppose the last thing I'll mention is this funny bit. They go to like a shop at the end, and there's like a big fish on the wall, big massive fish on the wall. And the guy they speak to working the till tells them that he personally caught it. But then they speak to like another employee and he tells them that he personally caught it. And then the owner is like, oh, of course they would say that, those stupid employees. It's my shop. I caught the dinosaur. And then the fish falls off and it's plaster and it breaks into like 1,000 pieces. And it's a fake fish in the first place, but every single person was like pretending that they'd been the one to catch it.
That's
That was actually funny.
That is pretty funny.
That was the only funny part. The only other thing I'll mention is a weird thing: the chapter titles. The chapter titles are all long, and they're lists that basically you could read this book by just reading the chapter titles.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, chapter 18: Locks, George and I are photographed, Wallingford, Dorchester, Abingdon, a family man, a good spot for drowning, a difficult bit of water, demoralized effort of river air.
The chapter titles are just the outline for that chapter.
They literally just are a list of the things that happen in the chapter. I've never seen that before.
Huh. This just be taken out.
That's kind of what you think.
Not every not every book needs chapter titles.
Not every book needs chapter titles, especially when they aren't even titles. They're just lists of the events that will... You could read the book by just reading the chapter titles.
Chapter 16, Reading. We are towed by steam launch. Irritating behavior of small boats. Okay, sure. George Harris again skirt their work.
This month's Books Boys is sponsored by the irritating behavior of small boats.biz.
That's fantastic.
Get it, buy it, boats. No, so that's... it was fine, you know?
Next book.